What's up, family? Welcome to After Dark with Thatbaldbrutha. On this show, we'll be having grown folk conversations about life, love, and everything in between as it relates to Black men and Black women. Tonight, we'll be talking with Allen Obi from the YouTube channel We Need to Talk. Young brother Allen, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
All right. So let's just jump right in. I'm a comic book fan, so I want to hear about your origin story. What brought you to this place? Where did We Need to Talk come from?
Damn, how far back can we go? So I started We Need to Talk when I was in college. That was about 2012, 13.
Okay.
And it started as an offshoot of the NAACP. I was the NAACP president on campus at the time.
All right.
And we used it as a means of having conversation that bridged gaps. And the main gap we focused on was racial gaps. So
Okay.
why do certain events only attract white people? Certain events only attract Black people. But, during those conversations, since the audience was mostly Black people, the perspective steered Black. So anyway, We Need to Talk grew to 7 campuses by the time I graduated. Thank you. And I had to get my life together, so I didn't really have the time to devote to it and cultivate it at each campus because we had a specific way that we approach conversations. So we, subsequently started closing down branches.
Gotcha.
And it was the pandemic that made me think, why not restart this in a way that is going to work for 2020, 2021. So I started doing one-on-one videos like a lot of YouTubers.
Right.
Wasn't getting any traction. So I was like, okay, let me incorporate people. Let me start having conversations. So I did. And one of the ones had, we were talking about Kevin Samuels.
Okay.
That's kind of where the idea came from. And we kind of grew it to what it is now.
Okay. Now, when it comes to picking the panelists, what's the process for selecting who you interview?
It's not as robust as you would think, right? I
Okay.
don't target specific Black women. Well, the 2 prerequisites: you have to be Black, you have to be female.
Okay.
3 prerequisites: Black, female, heterosexual. Right?
Okay.
We're talking about the male-female dynamic,
Right.
specifically in the Black community. It helps if they're attractive. It helps if they already have some kind of social following, social capital. So
Okay.
I've really been leaning heavily on my network, but at some point I know I'm going to run out of people. So I'm going to have to transition into like casting calls and stuff.
That's a good thing, though. Evolution is always good. Now,
Yeah.
I like the way you have it set up. I like the chair and the white background. It's very simple. Keeps everybody focused on what's happening in the conversations. Did you expect that the channel would take off the way it did? And I know it's still growing, right? But did you expect that a lot of the controversy, if we will, around the comments and commentary did you expect that to happen?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I expected it to happen because, back in college, we were having discussions with 150, 200, 300 kids in the building.
At one time
or in the room at one time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it got pretty big. The digital space is a lot different because you have to rely on the algorithm. You have to rely on keywords and things like that. So I didn't expect that aspect, but I think I'm starting to get a sense of, how to make the algorithm work for you. But it all starts with the content being quality, and I already knew how to do that. I also have a background in filmmaking, so
Nice.
It was just a matter of figuring out what the algorithm likes and just continuing to go that
Running
way.
with it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So now let's get into the meat and potatoes.
Let's do it.
Okay. Tell me what your thoughts are about the current state of the manosphere. There's been a lot of conversation around Kevin Samuels. We just got Jamil Hill chiming in. What is your thought about where we are currently?
I think you have two factions, right? I think you have the faction that in my opinion, comprises Kevin Samuels. You have like mediocre tutorials. You have the roommates,
Right.
and that is men do better. Men do better. Here's what to look out for. And then you have the factions that I would say comprise people like Fresh and Fit, which is women are out to get you.
Gotcha.
And
The vilify.
exactly, women are out to get you, and here are the tricks of how to manipulate, trick women, and this and that. And for me personally, I always start with men. I think we set the pace, and I think women follow. So even with me having these conversations, it's more so about demonstrating the right way to talk,
Right.
as opposed to pointing out the toxicity of women. Right now, that some of that inevitably comes out in my line of questioning. Some of that inevitably comes out in their um, answers. But my first goal is just to demonstrate to people how to have conversation. And I think, unfortunately, what the manosphere became was just a place for a lot of men who've been hurt and traumatized by women to air their grievances. And I don't think it's all bad, because I think some men have actually found community in that. Like, it wasn't just me. I wasn't the only stupid one. I wasn't the only one who got. But when the conversation stays at women, specifically Black women, are the villains, I don't think that's productive. So I'm trying to bridge that gap, in a way.
Yeah, and that's I'm on the same page with that, because I believe that the problem that we face is the lack of conversation.
Sure.
All I've seen, and that's what brought me to YouTube in the first place, was seeing all we do is yell back and forth. I'm right, you're wrong. Then you say you're right, I'm wrong, and when nothing gets solved, and we just become, enemies at the table.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a lot of chit chat. I shouldn't probably drop this name, but I'll say it. Cynthia G and her cavalcade of minions, or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
Followers, I guess you could say. I'm wondering what your thought is about all this cancel culture now, that where how is it that women, or some women, not women in general, some women are allowed to say things like, we should get rid of Black babies, or male babies, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And if I or you or someone else was to get on a channel and say that Black women should be taken out or something like that, we will be canceled tomorrow. How is that being allowed? And I understand YouTube has its standards, but what I find interesting, and no one's really brought this up, or maybe I haven't really seen anyone talking about it, is that I don't see other races bashing their, male or female counterparts the same way we do, and to the level that we do. So it's like no one else sees that that Black folk, the only ones that are allowed to talk trash about each other like this on YouTube, and no one's saying anything about. But white folk, you don't hear them doing much of that, or any other cultures that I know of. But if you know different, correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, so I think the reason why there's so much vitriol between Black men and Black women is I think we have to trace that back to our trauma, right? Okay. So our shared trauma of slavery and everything that followed, right? So that's a conversation. But I think what's interesting about, like you said, certain women are able to make these outrageous claims or threats, and nothing happens. I think it kind of points to the fact that, and I think this is interesting, because you have to incorporate feminism, but people don't necessarily believe women. Like, when a man makes a threat or makes a certain statement, there's a certain expectation of, he might do this, versus women, she's just talking, right? And one of the things I think points to this is, like, when we look at this, the suicide rate, for instance,
right?
We attempt suicide at the same rates. Men tend to be more successful because we tend to go to the extremes. It's like, I don't want to be here anymore. Whereas women, and that's why the pageant queen was so interesting, because that's typically a male way she took, right? So I think that's a piece of it. People don't believe women. But I think the other thing too is we've created an environment where the idea is that women are benevolent, women are beyond reproach, women are only bad because you made us this way.
Right. Above accountability.
Exactly. And it always points back to, well, if black men did better, we wouldn't say these things, which I think is dangerous. But bottom line, I think there's a sense of we can't really tell women much. And I think that's dangerous, but I don't know how far it's gonna go.
Now, so that leads me to the gender war question. I mean, are we in a gender war at this time? And if so, I mean, how do you think, or do you see an end to it? Is it going to be like the men have to figure it out, or the women have to come together, or it's going to be a one-sided effort? Because the way it feels, everything is being laid at the black man's foot, and saying that everything that's wrong with the community is our fault. To use some language, that we're dusty trash bags, right. So. But with no chance or no hope of recouping from that. So how do we end this war if we don't even qualify technically to really be in it, to fight it?
Right. For me, it's unfortunate. I think multiple things have to be happening simultaneously. For me, the conversation I'm actually most interested in is everything that men need to be doing.
From their perspective, you mean?
Yeah. Okay. So from the perspective of what men need to do for men. And I mean, some of those things include, financial knowledge. Some of those things include social knowledge, psychology, general, just like being able to stand on your own 2 feet, because that's the hallmark of manhood. And then you can dictate the kind of caliber of women that you entertain and you ultimately settle down with, if that's your goal.
Right.
And I think that will, in a small way, maybe raise the standard of excellence for women. Because right now there is no standard of excellence, because the fat girls, the dumb girls, the toxic girls, they still know some guy's gonna want them.
Right.
So when we starve the demand or the attention that we're giving them, and the demand for what we want them for, right, I think it'll have a domino effect in creating the type or the caliber of women that we find less problematic. On the other side, I think there needs to be, and I don't know if this has ever happened, but in our communities in particular, there needs to be a black female delegation. There needs to be it's kind of like we talk about hip hop sometimes. Back in the day, there were OGs, there were gatekeepers,
right,
from the community who had wisdom. And if you go all the way back to Africa, the chiefs, they dictated, this is what we are, this is what we're not.
Right.
And I think that's kind of lost in our women these days, because even their quote unquote OGs are only excusing their behavior. Only saying, girl, I wish I could have done this when I was your age, as opposed to, you don't need to go that way. And that's unacceptable. Right.
Oh, so you find that they're encouraging the behavior almost.
They're encouraging the behavior, and not just encouraging the behavior, they're coddling it. So it's more of that sense of, I understand why you, versus with men, it's like, that's unacceptable. Why did you do that? But with women is, I get it, girl, give me a hug, this, and that. So it creates an environment where there are like no consequences.
Gotcha.
And then at the end of the day, I can still attract some guy because he wants to sleep with me. So I think both those things need to happen simultaneously, but it's a very, very complicated conversation. And I like to start with white supremacy and that conversation, because I think it colors what the male-female dynamic is in our community in particular.
Well, see, and that's the thing. The divestors mentioned that, they're ready to go to the white man because they feel like, you mentioned in the video I was watching today, you said that the white man doesn't have to prove it himself. He has to prove he's a provider. So they already assume that he can do so because of his status in the, not just the community, but society.
In the world.
And so whereas black and brown men have to prove themselves to be worthy of being a provider and protector.
Yeah.
How do we have that conversation? Because I mean, when they, using the word gatekeepers, them being the gatekeepers, how do we change the narrative, or can we even change it?
I think we can. I just think we've been having the conversation incorrectly,
Okay.
right? So one of the things that I don't know if you're familiar with Shahrazad Ali.
Yes. A
Yeah.
little bit.
So in her book, The Black Man's Guide to Understanding the Black Woman, she talks about how there might be, and she posed this as a theory,
Mhm.
but I think it's really valid. She said there might be an underlying resentment that the Black woman has towards the Black man for
Okay.
not being able to fulfill his manly duty under the umbrella of slavery and Jim Crow and mass incarceration and vagrancy laws and everything that followed. Because when we really get down to the nitty gritty, the two things that validate your masculinity is your ability to provide and protect.
Right.
For all intents and purposes, during that time, men could not exist. Black men could not exist. Black women could still nurture, they can still care, they were, for all intents and purposes, able to still be women. But men could not exist.
Right.
And there were certain systems put into place to make sure Black men could not exist. And certain things that most people aren't aware of, men and women aren't aware of. So I think there needs to be I'm not even gonna say a relearning, but a learning, because we don't even
Yeah.
know, right?
There's a lot of
and,
untold
and
history. Yeah.
exactly. And from there, we can then start, having these conversations in the right way. Because what breaks my heart in particular is even in the conversations I have day to day,
Mhm.
there is a sense of amongst our women that Black men just don't want any better. And when you really investigate that, it's the same thing white people say, like, given better options, these men just don't want any better, without putting it in the proper context of what happened to these men
Right.
and
Why don't they want better?
and what continues to happen to these men. One of the things, one of the examples that I give to kind of illustrate this. So I lived in Baltimore, Maryland for about a year,
Okay.
and then I took it upon myself to live in a penthouse. So it was the top floor, downtown, the whole nine,
Nice.
and it was expensive. But I always thought to myself, and I actually told some of my female friends, I was like, if one day, for instance, I forgot my key, or I left my key card in my room, whatever the case may be, and I was standing outside my building with you, Black woman, and I was trying to solicit somebody to let me in the building, I asked them, who do you think they would allow in my building that I pay rent in? Who do you think they would allow in first?
Right. Yeah.
And that's something that I think enough of us don't actually dialogue with. So when we're looking at Black women achieving all these great things, those are good and great and fantastic things. But we don't consider what has been done to make sure Black males don't achieve the same thing. Because
Right.
it's a concerted effort. It's not that men don't want any better. It's not that boys are broken. Black boys are not broken. But I think if we're not being honest about the conversation a lot of times.
And do you think it's easier to for women, or so when you say that, are you saying that that women in general, not in general, but women that are on that feminist rhetoric, that's what they believe, and that they don't even want to look at the bigger picture?
I don't think. Well, so zooming out, I don't think enough people have the proper context to frame that conversation.
Okay.
And because they don't have the proper context, when they frame it with their experiences of my dad wasn't there, all the boys I know were slacking in class, or they were deadbeats, or whatever the case may be, it's very easy to come to a similar conclusion that white people come to every day, that Black boys are just inherently criminal, inherently disinterested, inherently unintelligent, inherently animals. And unfortunately, the thing that I don't think we've had enough dialogue around. Perfect example. I don't know if you heard about the what's his name, the producer of Black Panther.
I can't think of his name. The direct, not
The director, yeah. What's his name? Ryan Coogler.
Yes, Coogler. Yes.
Turns out the woman who called the police on him was a black woman.
Wow.
Turns out the woman who called the police on him was a black. Now, that's what I'm interested in. That is a more interesting conversation than white people are racist, because it's not that simple.
Right.
So
I gotta look up that. I didn't even know he was in any kind of trouble with that stuff.
Yeah. He almost got arrested because they thought he was robbing a bank. And when you look into the details of it, it's really. He handed her his ID.
Okay.
He also handed her a note saying, "I want to withdraw, I think $12,000 or $14,000." But he wanted to be discreet because this is Atlanta. People get robbed and everything. So he said, "This is my PIN number. This is the account I want to take it out of."
Right.
Here. She didn't check his ID. She didn't check anything. She just saw a black man in a gray hoodie and a mask because of COVID. She went to a manager and said, "I don't feel comfortable." And she was like, "Okay, call the police." The police showed up. They pulled their guns immediately.
Wow. He lucky to get shot. I could have gone south.
Now, if that happened, we would have been saying Black Lives Matter. But is that?
Yeah, because it would have been, the sister would have been the reason for that.
So it's such a complicated thing. But I don't think we're framing these conversations properly.
So when you mention the work, what work do we need to be doing? I know that we're going to speak for black men because we can't really address black women. I don't want to get people saying, "Oh, y'all can't speak to black women." We're not black women. What can we do to help our brothers come correct, for lack of a better term?
I think it starts with the understanding, and I must admit I'm at a privileged position because I came to this country as an immigrant. I'm Nigerian.
Okay.
So when I dialogue around some of these generational trauma, my generational trauma is different. It's from colonialism. It's not from transatlantic slavery,
right?
Specifically, but there's some secondhand trauma that I think is important to acknowledge, from a Pan-Africanist standpoint, but that's a different conversation.
Okay.
I think it starts with awareness. It starts with understanding that you were brought to this country to be no better than a mule, and your utility to the system is what you can do with your brain, with your brawn, not necessarily your brain.
Right. And
you're not meant to succeed under this system. So there's a sense of, you need to understand that to play the game properly. Like I say all the time, like part of being successful is learning how to make white people comfortable.
Yeah, I call it the corporate code switch.
Absolutely. Now, it's important to separate that from a African, Pan-African, Afrocentric consciousness.
Okay.
And I think that understanding colors how you move through the world and how you understand and empathize with your fellow Black people. Because I say it all the time, Black people are impossible to love unless you love Black people. We are incredibly difficult people to deal with unless you understand the context of why we are the way that we are.
Right.
And you're willing to offer grace. So I think, from that aspect, just first of all, understanding. And then I think, physical fitness is important.
Okay.
I think mental fitness is more important because that colors physical fitness. And then, financial fitness is a consequence of that. And then you could stand on your own too and fulfill the provide and protect mandate of masculinity.
Right.
And then you could dictate to the world what you want from it.
Now, when you said grace, do you feel like that's something that in abundance? I mean, we can barely get grace from our sisters regarding the current state of the Black man. Do you think you're talking about a global scale? Is that something we should even hope for?
I encourage individuals to practice that with themselves. So what I mean by that is, Tim Wise, for instance, and Jane Elliott, they talk about it all the time. They say that, white people are racist They were born in a system that positioned them as superior. So even the most well-meaning white people harbor racist
tendencies,
ideologies, the whole nine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of times we have that conversation from an emotional place. Like they were KKK and they were selling your grandfather into slavery. No, it's not that. It's they are the consequence of systems that exploited your ancestors.
Right.
So even their thinking is colored by that, whether they realize it or not. And I say sometimes all racists aren't bad people.
No.
You know, and that's weird on its surface. Like if somebody just clipped that part, I'd get canceled.
But go try to explain that so we can get that out so they say, oh, he didn't try to say what it was.
Listen, we get it to shake room. But just that understanding kind of colors how you move through the world and how you understand your place in the world and how to better exploit and leverage the power that you have. You know, because one of the things that, you know, we talk about sometimes is the soft bigotry of low expectations. That's an opportunity.
Right. In what way?
That's an opportunity for your life to improve by white people wanting to make an example of you. Oh, you're a smart guy. You talk nice.
You're so eloquent.
You're so eloquent. Well. That's an opportunity. Now, if you're in an emotional state, you look at it like, how dare you, this and that. You can do that later when you've made your millions. Exactly. But if we're speaking from an emotional place, we don't actually get anything done. So that's what I'm telling boys and I'm telling men is leverage the advantages that you have to get what you want. And don't forget the context that you operate in.
Right. But that requires changing your perspective to some degree because you have to understand, like you said, and see the opportunity and separate the emotion from Absolutely. The decision. Because a lot of times, as you mentioned before, we're a caricature, right? We're the stereotype versus the caricature. We're supposed to be angry and aggressive, and we're always a threat until we're not a threat.
Yeah.
So Absolutely. By separating our emotion from the situation, then we can gain more better control, which throws some people off because they're surprised to see that when you do that, it's like, oh, well, he's moving a little different now because he's not acting emotion. Because they expect us to get all fired up. That's what the whole angry black man, angry black woman stereotype comes from because they expect us to be all in emotion.
Yeah. I can control an angry person. Right. I can't control the stoic. Right. and one of the tools was making sure that a lot of these boys are growing up in matriarchal environments. So a lot of our boys are emotional. They look at it as being gangster, being tough, or being I'm ready to fight and pop off in it. But you're really a woman with muscles. And that's what I think a lot of our boys don't realize. They think that energy is healthy, but that's not masculinity. Masculinity is being able to de-escalate, not escalate. Because you have to deal with those consequences as a man.
Well, and so I'll go back to masculinity in a second, but I just want to sidebar into this whole thing about the consequences of that. Mm-hmm. I was watching the video about the woman fighting men. Yeah. And it was a question of, well, why would a man hit a woman in the first? Look, this is for the women watching. If you feel like that you could swing on anybody, a man or a woman, you got to be prepared to take the consequences of those actions. Mm-hmm. That's it. It's not about you hit me, I'm a woman. No, you raise your hand against anybody, you're going to understand that person can defend themselves. And no person in their right mind, man or woman, again, is going to stand by and let somebody else beat on them if they can help it anyway. Absolutely. So that's crazy. Now, going back to masculinity, how else would you define it? You mentioned that it's de-escalating. What other traits would you consider for masculinity? I must follow up with a femininity question as well, because I think people are getting confused about what the definition is, and that's where a lot of the arguments come from.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting. Somebody made a point that masculinity can exist, outside of femininity, but femininity cannot exist outside of masculinity. Because outside of masculinity, it turns into masculinity. The way that I look at it, I always frame things from a procreation, generational growth perspective.
Okay.
And I think a man's role is to impart your children with the wisdom of how to survive.
Okay.
So that means literally survival, right? How to provide for yourself, how to protect yourself, how to interact with the world, how to dialogue with your community and the whole nine, how to be useful,
Yeah.
right? I think one of the things Kevin Samuels brings up that I really agree with. He says that if you're not able to be used, you're useless. Like if
True.
somebody can't quote unquote exploit you, you're useless. You don't have any utility, right? So I think from my perspective, masculinity starts with utility.
Okay.
It's always started with utility. I mean, we're not that far removed from you were born as a boy and you were automatically going to be a warrior. You're automatically going to be a farmer. You're automatically going to be a coal miner or whatever was laid out for you because boy the utility was clearer um, in the old days, whereas now it's a little bit different.
A lot more
um,
gray.
exactly, it's a lot more gray, and I think that's what's leading to the mental health crisis among men. Like, not only are we not as useful in the ways that were simple and that we were conditioned to be,
Hmm.
um, we're also being told over and over again that we're not useful, that we
Yeah.
don't need you, women don't need you, we don't need you, this, especially black boys. And I think what that's leading to is a lot of people are opting out, and they
Mm.
either seclude themselves in their room playing 2K, or they take more drastic, a more drastic route to prove their masculinity in a very pseudo masculine way, which tends to
Right.
be violence.
Right. That's your toxic masculinity they talking about.
Or they turn it inward.
Yeah.
So like one of the things right now, and this isn't just our community, I think the fastest growth rate in suicidality is white men.
Wow. I
You
know
know,
that.
and a lot of that is colored by the fact that they're losing their jobs. They're losing their ability to be the patriarch. They're losing their ability to, stand up tall and say, I can do for myself and my family reveres me and this and that. And then the media is also pushing this narrative that men are stupid. Men, dad doesn't know best, mom knows best. So just dad is whatever. And what
Yeah.
we're also seeing is that boys don't want to be that anymore. Boys don't want to be Homer Simpson or Family Guy. We would rather be a pimp for the rest of our lives. So a
Yeah.
lot of these things, I think, is feeding, the I think it's a consequence of just the technological revolution, the feminism,
Yeah.
some of the fallout of the breakdown of civil rights. I think all those things are consequences of it. But femininity, in contrast, is, like I said, masculinity is teaching your children how to survive. I
Hmm.
think the mother teaches the children why to survive.
Hmm.
I think
Okay.
femininity is all about perspective. It's all about outlook. It's all about, and I think that's why women tend to be very enthusiastic and optimistic,
Okay.
even even when they're really wrong. They think they're really right. There, a sense of that is so necessary to make anything happen.
Right.
Women are creators. You have to be audacious and damn near delusional, like we say a lot of times, to create, right?
Yeah.
So, but when that is in its unhealthy stage, it turns into masculinity.
So do you feel that again, not all, because not everybody's on the
Mhm.
same page, but
Sure,
do you feel like a lot of the rhetoric is in that unhealthy is promoting that unhealthy stage? I mean,
absolutely.
is it so bad that, you know, I mean, I was watching something the other day where they're saying, well, guys should want a woman who has all these degrees and has all this status,
Mhm.
and we appreciate your ability to have these degrees and make this money, but in the grand scheme of things, as far as a complimentary thing, is that doesn't necessarily something we're looking for. We're looking for personality and character. We're looking for more compatibility, more consideration, more connection. The money and the status is great, but if I can't get along, we can't get along with you, then what do we have? What kind of relationship can we possibly have?
Yeah. So, so I was a business major back in school, and
Okay.
one of the things that stood out to me was when we learned about opportunity cost.
Okay.
And I think more people outside of business need to understand opportunity costs. And simply, it's just there is a cost for the decision you didn't make or that you didn't take. You know, and I bring that up to talk about, you know, why the boss bays and those women tend to be horrible partners.
Okay.
Because the skills necessary to conquer industry and corporate America and your law firm and go through med school and the whole nine and make multiple six figures, in a way, especially for a woman, are in direct conflict with the skills necessary to join in partnership. Some people can do it,
Right.
but on the macro, if we're looking at big numbers, most people cannot. And part of what's necessary to be successful in corporate America, for instance, is you have to be, in a sense, disagreeable. Disagreeableness is a masculine trait.
Right.
Agreeableness is a feminine trait. I tell dudes all the time, the sexiest thing you can say to a woman is no. And the sexiest thing a woman can say to a man is yes. But in order to
That's crazy. That's crazy that's so simple and you can't even get that.
Yeah. But in order to make it, you have to be disagreeable. And that's why you see a lot of the women who are very, very uber successful struggle in dating because they don't have the skills to be with a man. And the other thing too, and I've talked about it in one of the videos, they think that men and women are graded on the same curriculum.
And clearly we're not, especially when it comes to, like we just talked about, the military thing, where there's lower expectations for a woman to pass to be part of the army, just picking on the army, versus a guy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you know, when it comes to guys and girls, that something that would make, for instance, you could be a really, really handsome guy, tall in the whole nine, but if you open your mouth and you have no bass in your voice, for 9 out of 10 women, you're done. Right? In the inverse, and this is where women don't agree, they expect us to still find a woman with the masculine voice attractive. It works in the inverse. Like we might still, you know, but you lose some points.
Yes.
And that goes to the other things as well. Like, so our women these days, unfortunately, have had to become operational men.
Explain.
And they're killing it in schools, they're killing it in industry, they're killing it here, they're killing it there. But when it comes to mating with a man that's actually a man, I'm not talking about somebody who's looking for a man, because some dudes are looking for men. A man who's actually a man, those things are not attractive. I don't want a woman who sounds like me.
Right.
I don't want a woman with broad shoulders. And these are just the superficial things.
Right.
So when you also have a masculine, aggressive, we're going to take it by force, listen to me disposition.
Do it my way. I don't like hearing no, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And what I've been explaining to women recently is that, you know, I'm not a huge biblical scholar.
Right.
But the Bible talks about Samson being the most powerful man in the Bible, you know, strength and stuff like that.
Right.
And I actually say, no, the most powerful person in the Bible was Delilah. She couldn't match Samson physically, but she had cunning, she had seduction, she had persuasion.
Yep. And
one of the opportunity costs of trying to beat your chest is that you lose that. And you lose a power that's actually, in my opinion, more potent than however many muscles I have or however loud my voice can get. Right. And when you see feminine women in action, they don't have to say much. They don't have to say much, but yeah.
And those that know that skill set and have developed it, yeah.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Absolutely.
You mentioned in another video where men are, so the scenario was you were asked a question about, you know, a man talking to two women. Which one does he love more? The one he's vulnerable with versus the one he's lying to, we'll say lying to. Yeah. And you call this the Superman paradox. I refer to it as the Bruce Wayne Batman paradox.
Yeah.
Why do we men, I guess I would say black men, why do we black men find it easier to be Bruce Wayne versus Batman? And Bruce Wayne being the one who is being, like you said, being the kind and don't want to hurt feelings, and versus the Batman who just puts it all out on the table, very direct.
Well, you said we find it easier to be Batman or Bruce Wayne?
Bruce Wayne, because you said, I think in the analogy you were saying that a man loves a woman more, that he's not going to tell her everything and not be vulnerable with her.
Yeah. Well, I think the reason we're gonna lie to the girl we actually care about is that's the one we want to keep the fantasy alive for.
And the fantasy being the Disney fantasy.
How she views us. So she views us as this, you know, the man of her dreams, her white knight.
Gotcha.
Right. And because I've been in that scenario as well, where I might have a young lady that I like and another lady I like too, but if she decides tomorrow she doesn't want to talk to me, my feelings wouldn't be hurt.
Right.
And I'm more likely to be honest with the girl who my feelings wouldn't be hurt, because it is what it is.
Right.
Right. But the girl that I actually care about, I understand women are idealistic. And as much as she says, you know, tell me the absolute truth, I don't think that's what you want. I don't think that's because the truth is, and Warren Farrell talks about this. He said most men's fantasy is multiple women. That's the truth. Most women don't want to hear that, and that's not a truth that they're willing to dialogue with. But when we're looking at it biologically, psychologically, not saying we should, but that is our disposition.
Right.
Right. So yeah, it's the woman that you're most concerned with protecting. That's how I'll put it. You know, whether it's her feelings or her, you know, her mental or whatever, but it's the one you're most interested in protecting. I think there should be more honesty, but I get it. I get why we, I guess, pretend to be more so Bruce Wayne for her. But at the same time, most women fall in love with Batman.
That's the thing. That's the thing. They run these streets with Batman,
Yeah.
and then when they get tired, they come home. As the stereotype goes, they get tired and come home looking for Bruce Wayne.
Facts.
So, and Bruce Wayne is also doing the code switching and the corporate code switch too, so he can do all that.
Absolutely.
But it slides into the conversation of polyamory, which seems to be a hot topic now. Mm-hmm. That everybody's, you know, concerned, is that the new thing to be polyamorous versus monogamous? What's your thoughts on that?
I said it on a panel. I think we, particularly in our community, I think we need to start being honest with ourselves. I think polyamory has been a reality. It's a new conversation, but it's an old reality. Like,
low key.
Exactly. So maybe grandpa didn't have multiple wives. I'm just talking the American context for now. Right. I'll get to Africa. But maybe grandpa didn't have multiple wives, but he had a family down, you know, on the other side of town. He had a young lady and maybe some kids. Like, I know how many people I've talked to, and they were like, they showed up to their grandpa's funeral, for instance, and they met family members that they didn't know they
existed. Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? So that's been a reality. You could make the argument it's colored by our ancestors were polyamorous. And the other thing too is, one of the reasons I think it's at least a worthwhile conversation for this generation is there is an abundance of marriage-ready women. Supposedly, right?
Right.
There's not so much of an abundance of the type of man those women idealize.
Who are they?
The type of man they idealize?
Mm-hmm.
The 6 foot Tupac with a PhD. Right. This Renaissance action hero
with the kung fu grip.
Exactly. That guy who makes 6 figures and is this, and he walks in the room and it lights up. So it's like, okay, either you can get a lesser man and complain for the rest of your life, which is what we're doing currently.
Right.
Or you can decide, I'm going to share this guy. Because the other thing, apparently, according to some stats, there are more Black women with children than Black men.
Oh, because is that because of them going outside of the black community?
I don't know that, and that's a good point. But one of the conclusions they were making is that women are sharing the same men.
Gotcha. Okay.
So like one guy has multiple baby mamas,
Yeah.
whereas some women, they might have multiple baby daddies, but it's like I have kids by this guy, she has kids by that same guy, he has kids by that same. Especially when we're looking at the urban communities, the impoverished, underserved communities, which
Right.
tend to be the bulk of our 15%. So yeah, we're gonna have to have real conversation. Should we formalize these arrangements that y'all have going on, or are we just gonna continue to pretend
That they don't exist.
they don't?
They're already low key formalized because you're going along with it, because you half the people know, unfortunately, they know they're sharing, but they don't want to face the reality of it,
Mhm,
because
mhm.
then that's when the fights break out and people getting
Exactly.
cut up and all that foolishness. So that's crazy.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts about dating in today's world? Like with social media being the thing, and it's all for the eye, all for the gram these days, as these young folks saying. Forgive me for dating myself. But
Yeah.
it's just, as someone who's in the dating world, back in the dating world now, been divorced and all that. So it's like, it's interesting to see how the landscape has changed
Yeah.
from when I was coming up. It's like, I'm trying to navigate these waters in a what do they call, one of those lifeboats versus having a needing an aircraft carrier. It seems like.
Right. I I think going back to one of your first questions, the marketing apparatus is aimed at the woman and the female fantasy. And unfortunately, part of the female fantasy has conflated love and romance.
Okay.
And now love has been reduced to an aesthetic. Love is dates. Love is trips, around the world. Love is the cutesy pictures. Love
Flashy.
is flashy, exactly. And what people who aren't pragmatic don't realize is that a lot of things that are flashy are unsustainable.
Correct.
And this is part of masculine energy is understanding sustainability as opposed to just flash.
Right.
And these days in the dating marketplace, like you'll see, for instance, the girl who went viral recently. She said she's all her friends are getting married, and they're another talking phase that she had fell through. Really, if we're being honest, most women these days are only interested in weddings, not marriages.
Yeah, because the marriage is the work, the wedding's a show.
The work, exactly. It's about validating my desirability, because that's the ultimate validation. Yeah, no, women move up their social hierarchy when they, find a man to love them, and then
Gotcha.
they find a man to put a ring on it, and then find a man to give them the wedding of their dreams, and take all the cute pictures that can make all their friends and now women around the world that they don't know jealous. And and that's what it's about.
They're chasing the validation.
It's all about
the ultimate thirst trap.
It's all about, because I ask myself sometimes, when you see some of these, like their Instagram pages now, YouTube channels now dedicated to couple goals and particularly Black love. Like there's a page called Me and Somebody's Son. And it's a compilation of different, I'm assuming they're couples, with cutesy pictures. They're on a beach somewhere, or they're in a bathtub somewhere. And I'm always asking myself, who took this picture?
Right. They're showing all the highlights.
Exactly. Who set up the camera and was like, okay, we're going to do this, this, and that. And then like, what happened right after this picture? Is it that? But women just see that and they think, oh, they're having their own rom-com. Why can't I have mine?
And that's the thing, the cameras go off at some point. Not to cut you, but the cameras go off because people don't realize. I want to see the before we shout action. I want to see after we yell cut. That's what I want to see. Because then it's back to, then we go into separate rooms. I can't stand you neither. And then everybody's back. Everybody puts out the image that everything is Krispy Kreme and all great. But you don't realize that in order for people that have been together for 50 years and know that kind of legacy, they weren't getting along all those times. There was a
Exactly.
lot of smoke coming from both sides, but no one talks about that. Oh, they still together. Well, there's a lot of glue there that kept them together, but that's part of another conversation.
One of the philosophers that I'm like obsessed with right now, his name is Allen Obi. I
Okay.
probably butchered that, but it's spelled Alain, Obi, and he has been talking a lot recently about romance.
Okay.
And he said that, and I thought this was genius. He said that our idea of romance was invented by unemployed artists.
Okay.
So when you consider some of the things like long walks on the beach, watching the sunset, and all these things, it's like these people didn't have jobs.
They had all this
These
time to
people
do
didn't
that.
have They didn't have children. They didn't have to do laundry. They didn't have to file taxes. But we're still basing our ideals off of these unsustainable, unrealistic things that work good on a movie screen or work good in a novel, but don't actually translate to day-to-day actual life.
Right.
Now, I think men get this.
Okay.
I think women are struggling to make that separation.
Do you think that they're seeing it as an ongoing thing? Because you can have days like that. But like you said, sustainability is the challenge. You can't do that every weekend. It's not going to be all the time because you do have 9 to 5. You both are working, hopefully. So it's possible to have that on occasion. But if you get into the delusion that that's all there's going to be, is that you get married and it's always going to be long beach walks and sitting up all hours of the night. No, there's a whole other thing to maintain this image. Requires a great deal of 9 to 5 sweat, blood, and tears.
Absolutely. One of the comments that broke my heart on one of my videos, this guy said that when he got with his ex-girlfriend, he was an alcoholic. He was a terrible alcoholic. And at some point he wanted to get his life together, and he did. And she ended up leaving him because she said he was boring.
Wow.
He said he became boring.
Because he...
Right.
Okay.
Because he's no longer the party, the turn up guy anymore. And it's like, unfortunately for too many of our people, and when I say our people, I'm not just talking about Black people. It's like life is all about highlights. Life is all about, I think a lot of people are bored. That's how I boil it down. Because they're bored, they don't know how to be bored. So they think that super highs and super lows is what life is about, as opposed to
the in-between.
The in-between, exactly. The in-between, and who am I most excited to be stuck in the house doing nothing with, as opposed to who am I most excited to run out into the street and do whatever with. And they think that's love, as opposed to the sustainable sitting in the house on a rainy day stuff.
That's an interesting point. I would jump on that and say, I think that this whole thing with the lockdown and COVID exacerbated that problem, because you got a lot of folks that suffer cabin fever that are now going batshit crazy because mandates are being lifted. And so all we had was YouTube and streaming and in your house for those who decide to stay, who are adhering to the rules, and versus people that were running around the streets that were still trying to live their life like it was like 2018.
Absolutely.
So I think that also contributes to this mindset that I'm all I got. I got to figure out on my own. I don't need a man. As I can figure. I have to do this on my. I'm working from home. All these things are kind of playing into that, and I think the lockdown didn't do us a good service in that respect. It was protective for the disease part of it, but socially, I think it detrimentally affected us.
I struggle to say that because I think it just exposed. I think it exposed things. So like you're hearing like the divorce rate supposedly went up during COVID or coming out of COVID or whatever.
Right.
And some things that a lot of people were ignoring or procrastinating on, they had to finally address. I don't like this person. I actually hate you, or I despise you, and I think, I'm still working through if this is a fortunate reality or an unfortunate reality. But one of the conversations I'm interested in is, as a society, we might have to renegotiate our relationship with marriage. our relationship with long-term monogamy. Number one, people are living longer than they've ever been living. So till death do us apart is longer than it was for our great
Before. Right.
grandparents.
Right.
Number two, you have more access to individuals than your grandpa was cool knowing he had the finest girl in his city. Now you have access, for all intents and purposes, to the finest women in every single city. So as a man,
Let alone country.
exactly, it's harder to be satisfied because that's a battle that we have just inherently, I would say.
Yeah.
As a woman, you're constantly chasing ideals, and there are more Joneses to keep up with now. There's more grass to look at now and how green it is.
Right. Right.
And for all intents and purposes, you don't necessarily need men in the ways that your grandmas did. And men don't necessarily need women in the ways that your grandpas did, right? So we might have to renegotiate what this looks like. I think one of the consequences, the marriage rate will drop, the divorce rate will increase, or maybe just one or the other.
Okay.
But what worked and what allowed people to sustain through the ups and downs, I don't think those reasons exist anymore, and I don't think that disposition is necessary. Like back in the day, we talk about grandma and grandpa stuck together through thick and thin. Where was she gonna go?
That's true.
Like, where was she gonna go? But today, I'm probably make more than you, sir. You know, as a woman, I probably make more than you. There's 50 dudes in my DMs. I have options.
Yeah, paradox of choice.
Exactly. So we're gonna have to renegotiate what this looks like going into the future.
Well, you mentioned modern women. So you mentioned, I'm paraphrased. You gave modern women three options: die alone, share, or divest. I'm paraphrasing, of course.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's where we are? I mean, is that what we have to look forward to, more of that, where it's not going to be a thing of, like you said, relationships, marriages, and stuff are going to have to be redefined? Are we at a place now where that's it? It's either divest, share, or die alone? And does it cut both ways for men and women, I guess?
Yeah. I think the reason I directed that at women is because I think women idealize long-term companionship in a way that men don't.
Okay.
I think most men, if we never got married, as long as I keep pimping or whatever the case may be, it will hit us. I'm not saying it won't, but ever since girls were little, women were little girls, they've been dreaming of this thing. And one of the things I think is interesting, like, women are excited by the prospect of love. Men tend to be bummed. We're like, oh crap, I love her, because we jump to the responsibility. We jump to the sacrifice, whereas women jump to the ideals. And I think there's something beautiful about both. But there's a book by James Sexton. He's a divorce attorney. I think a 20-year divorce attorney. And it's called If You're in My Office, It's Already Too Late. And
I like that.
He named the book that because he said that in his 20 years of practicing, maybe 3 people started the process and didn't see it through. So if you're in my office, it's already too late. But one of the things he mentioned in one of his interviews, he said that most people aren't honest with why they're looking for long-term monogamy.
Okay.
They think they're looking for it because, or most people settle at, my parents got married and I'm gonna get married, and that's what it is. Versus the reality is that you're looking for a long-term sexual partner, or you're looking to solve your loneliness problem, or you're looking to spread out the financial burden. And most people don't actually sit down and have the conversation as to, like, why am I seeking this thing? And inevitably, what tends to happen is, if you're looking for sex, there are a lot of people married who don't have sex.
Yes.
You're looking for financial stability. There are a lot of people who are married, the wife or the husband doesn't help at all. They're broke. If you're looking for, I don't want to be lonely anymore. There are a lot of, you can not be alone and be lonely.
That's true.
Right. So his point was that we need to be more honest about, he calls marriage a technology, honest about why you're seeking this technology. What problem do you want it to solve for you? And I bring that up to say, I think if we were more honest, most people would realize that they don't actually want marriage.
What they actually want.
Exactly. They just want what comes with it, and those things that come with it. Do I necessarily need to sign on the dotted line for that, or is there a compromise somewhere that I can still get what I want without exposing myself in a way that I'm not actually comfortable with? But for the people who actually want marriage, I think they need to be more, like I said before, pragmatic about, okay, what is the
why?
agreement? The why.
Okay. Well, it's been great, Allen. I really appreciate you taking time to talk to us.
Absolutely, thank you.
I'm gonna leave a link in the chat. Not a link in the chat. I'm gonna leave a link in the description to the We Need to Talk channel. Definitely check it out. You guys are coming up, breaking some ground. I appreciate seeing the young folk having good conversations and sharing thoughts. Thanks again. You have any projects you're working on coming up that you want to share with us?
I'm about to introduce a new series called Black Men Talk.
Okay.
Where, instead of me talking to Black women, I'm actually going to be talking to Black men. One of the first episodes, I'm talking to a Black cop.
Okay.
So we're going to have I think that's going to be an interesting conversation.
Yes,
Another episode, I'm talking to my little brother who's a Gen Zer.
Okay.
So I think, so I'm going to find different, chasms to bridge within Black manhood. And
it's something you're going to start some serious conversations, brother. So
absolutely,
we're looking forward to that. Thanks again, and we wish you guys well over there. Keep us in touch, and we'll be talking to you.
Absolutely.
Thanks again to Allen Obi and the team over at We Need to Talk. Looking forward to more content from that young man. And thank you for taking time to check out the video. There'll be more shows like this coming up real soon, so stay tuned.